roughly going to try to do along the way. Does that sound good? Yeah. All right. I'm not so excited about that. Oh, man. I don't know what it is. I love it. Andrew, where are you from? Well, my parents met as graduate students at UC Berkeley. Any bears here now? So they met as graduate students. They wanted to stay here in California, but my dad ended up getting a job at GE in Schenectady. So I was born in upstate New York. Yeah. Then I grew up in upstate New York. I went to school in New England, and I've been working in startups for about 20 years. And then 8 years ago, I started a nonprofit called Venture for America that ended up taking me all over the country.
No, but where are you really from?
Indeed.
Where are you really from?
He's gonna keep going with this.
Come on, Andrew. Outside of New York. Yeah.
I did want to ask, because I hear a lot of your gang right here in the audience, but I kind of wanted to go back to the original gang, the family of four that you guys have, and just kind of go back to pre-campaign Andrew Yang that got sleep, that woke up, had breakfast.
I remember those things.
Yeah, let's go back to that time.
I'd say the biggest real pivot for me was when I left my business to start Venture for America. So I was in some ways prepared to run for president because I've been running a national nonprofit for 7 years, and that set of activities is actually not that dissimilar from being a candidate. But I just want to emphasize how much how much we all have in common, where my parents just said, do well in school, get good grades, get a good job, and I tried to listen. And then I was an unhappy lawyer for 5 months. Sorry, lawyers. I'm sure there's some of you here, maybe one or two. And then I left to start a business that did not work out, and then I worked in startups for a period of time. So this is not that unusual, I think. Like, you all know many people in our community that resemble that. After my company was acquired in 2009, I became very sad about what was going on in much of the country, where I felt like the financial crisis had, to me, made very clear that we had too much talent heading to Wall Street and management consulting firms and becoming corporate lawyers. And so I started this nonprofit to help train entrepreneurs in places like Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore, St. Louis. So that was really like the major divergence, I would say, from what you consider like a fairly normal entrepreneurial career. And so when you ask what my life was like pre-running for president, it's really more what it was like pre-running for Venture for America. And that when you start traveling this country, at least for me, I had never been to St. Louis or Birmingham or Cleveland or New Orleans, and I was staggered by the gulf between those parts of the country and, frankly, places like this one, or where I'd grown up. And so during that time, I came to realize that our country is in much worse shape than I thought. And then when Donald Trump won in 2016, I thought that for whatever reason, immigrants were being scapegoated for issues that immigrants had nothing to do with. And that it's not immigrants, it's the fact that technology has advanced to a point where many, many Americans are struggling to get by.
And that first initial moment when you told your wife that you were going to run, where were you in the kitchen? Were you kind of just, I want to be president,
What's funny is that we actually talk about this now and we laugh about it, because we had this conversation, but she's like, I genuinely do not remember the conversation.
Was it after the Rice Krispies, after the first cup of coffee? Oh, by the way, honey, I'm considering this.
What I said to her, I said, hey, baby, I'm going to have lunch with this guy, Andy Stern, and if he comes back and tells me that no one else is going to run for president on the fact that automation is displacing all these American workers, then I'm going to end up doing it. And she said, okay, well, let me know how that goes.
She quickly drove to church and was praying.
And Andrew, let's talk about your most important contribution to the world so far, your lack of tie. I think you've liberated me.
Yes.
When he became president, he didn't wear a hat. That liberated American men from wearing hats, so we will see a sartorial shift because of you. But we have a little bit in common. You're the son of Taiwanese immigrants, is that right?
Yes.
I'm the son of Vietnamese refugees. I'm sure there are a lot of children of refugees and immigrants in the audience today, and my refugee background had a huge impact on my life. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be a child of Taiwanese immigrants?
Well, I think that many people here in the audience, and I'm sure you can relate to many of the experiences where you grow up, your parents are immigrants, and so you feel like your spot in this country is somewhat in question. At least that's the way I felt growing up. And when I grew up, I'm 44 now, so there were only 3 TV networks, and they added the 4th and whatnot. So there were only a few channels to watch. And American culture was fairly well defined, I think, at that time. So my brother and I tried to fit in, really, and failed a lot of the time, I would say. I went to Chinese school on weekends. I was a very nerdy Chinese kid, played piano and had braces and had really big glasses, because they hadn't invented thin glasses yet. I didn't, whoever invented those didn't solve a favorite. But my parents said, look, just work hard. And certainly, to the theme of today's event, there was never a message about politics. There was never, run for office or any of that. It was keep your head down, study hard, do well in school. I was one of the only Asian kids in my town, and so that made me feel like I had to sort of prove myself a lot. I guess you'd call it bullied now, a fair amount. Got called chick and gook and things like that fairly regularly. And I felt like I had a choice at that time to either take it or fight, and so I decided to fight. And I'd skipped a grade, I was very skinny, so I would lose most all of those fights. That gives you a sense of the arc. And then, when you get older too, like I ended up going to Exeter and Brown, and there was a period during which spending time with other Asian Americans was like a real relief. And I also went to these nerd camps during the summer where there were lots of Asians. Shocking. And so there was this period during my adolescence where it felt like there was almost like my town and the school district, which was almost entirely white. And then I'd have summers or other environments where I'd spend more time with more people who were Asian American.
Well, part of what you're sketching out is the background that I think a lot of us are familiar with. We as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are expected to succeed, and you have all the credentials that you're supposed to have. So stereotypically, we seem to fit well into this idea of a meritocratic society. And yet I think your idea of universal basic income implies that there's some problems with a meritocratic society that's built on winners and losers, and the people who lose are the ones to blame, not the system itself. Do you agree with that assessment? Is meritocracy something that is as American as apple pie, or should we be worried about that impact on people?
Well, first, I get mistaken for a West Coast Asian an awful lot, which I take as a real compliment, because I feel like all the cool Asians are West Coast Asians. And the cool Asians are West Coast Asians in part because I think the kids who grow up here don't have the same isolation or marginalization that my brother and I grew up where, instead of a town where it's literally like 1 or 2% Asian, in my experience, it might be like 20 or 40 or 50 or something along those lines. And despite the fact that I was very good at filling out Scantron sheets and bubble cards and whatnot, I do think that the American meritocracy has serious problems, and right now that it's being sold to people, oversold, actually, and it's being used as a means to keep things essentially the way they are and have privilege just get passed from, within families and within communities at this point. There needs to be a fundamental questioning, in part because I was a corporate attorney for 5 months, which is long enough to know that you can automate that job now. If you have software that can do the job of many workers, it's independent of your merit. If you have artificial intelligence that can read a radiology film more accurately than any human radiologist, it's not that the radiologist was lazy or isn't trying hard, it's just the software can reference more data points and can see shades of gray that the human eye cannot. So if we cling too long to the fact that it's like, oh, you get what you deserve, even when that stops making sense, then it's going to set this country up for a very difficult time.
Since we're talking about UBI, and I know you're going to get there, and maybe bring it up once or twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times during our conversation, I'm very interested in what is the intermediate step to get that, I'm going to give you $1,000. You don't turn on the switch, as you know, and that happens. What's the intermediate step?
You're not going to believe this, but in the 1960s, this was so mainstream that the US government just started giving thousands of families thousands of dollars just to see what would happen. I know that sounds far out now, but we did it in the 60s, and this plan was so mainstream it passed the US House of Representatives twice in 1971. Richard Nixon was for it, called the Family Assistance Plan. Martin Luther King was for it. Milton Friedman, 1,000 economists endorsed it. So what they did is they started piloting it by distributing money in various towns throughout the country, and that to me would be the logical place to start.
But you understand, or so you're starting towns, you understand the very whiplash nature of our economy today. We go back to 2007. We look at the current indicators, the job report for the first time. We've seen a reduction in manufacturing. I know you have a view on that.
Yeah.
But how would you deal with, because you turn on the spigot for $1,000 for everybody, but if we're in a 2007 situation, which could happen again, what would be your immediate emergency steps and your intermediate steps, which the Obama administration had to undertake?
Well, in the financial crisis, the Obama administration, you can't begrudge them any decision they made because it was an emergency, it was a crisis. You just have to do whatever you can to pull us back from the brink. But they had a fundamental choice. The choice was either recapitalize the banks or forgive the mortgage debt of people. And they chose to recap the banks. They printed $4 trillion for the banks, and many, many Americans lost their homes. And so if we were in a situation like that, to me, you should distribute those approaches much more evenly. And it cannot be that if an individual American ends up falling through the cracks and it's their fault, but if a large institution is on the verge of failure, then we act like we have unlimited resources, which is essentially what we did.
Would we do that again if you were to face, let's say, you are now in the general election, you win in 2020, as has happened when we switch from one administration to another, there is some sort of cataclysmic something. What if it is a repeat of that?
If faced with the same set of decisions, I would put resources directly into the hands of the American people, because that money would get spent. Right now, 78% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Almost half can't afford an unexpected $400 bill. So if you give them some money, they're going to end up spending it in their local communities, at their Main Street businesses, on daycare, home repairs, Little League signups, and things that'll help make their communities stronger. What we did is we pushed $4 trillion into the banks, and we ended up with these mega bubbles in certainly stock market prices, private company valuations, some coastal real estate. The average American in the interior of the country did not experience the gains in the same way that, frankly, people like many of us here in this room did.
So your UBI proposal says people start getting $1,000 a month at 18 years of age, right?
Yeah, that's right.
As the father of a 6-year-old, I want to know why my 6-year-old, meaning me, will also not get $1,000 per month. Because he's expensive.
Well, I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I feel your pain. And a lot of it is that you want to have the individual citizen receive the money in a way that they actually have some autonomy and agency. And I want you to imagine it, because I'm looking forward to this day, where you can look at your son, and you look at your son and say, when you turn 18, you're going to get $1,000 a month from your country, because your country loves you, your country values you, and you're an American. And you're going to take a financial literacy class in high school, and it will actually matter to you, because you'll get some money. And right now, if you're anything like me, a lot of what stresses you out is trying to save for your son's future. So the fact that that's waiting for him when he becomes an adult is a game changer, and it would be a game changer for parents everywhere.
Okay. You're saying for all Americans, right? So, where does that start? Do residents who are not citizens get the UBI? Do new immigrants who have just arrived in this country get UBI? And what about undocumented immigrants as well?
I'm obviously the son of immigrants myself. I know that immigrants are extraordinarily positive in terms of both their economic and social impact. The freedom dividend that I'm proposing would be for citizens, and so if you're a permanent resident or green card holder, this would be an incentive for you to become a citizen For people who are here and undocumented, I'm for path to citizenship for people who are here and undocumented. Right now, our situation right now is essentially the worst of all worlds, where we have 11 million plus undocumented immigrants in this country, and that they're in this gray zone where we don't know who everyone is. They are paying taxes in many cases, but they don't have a path forward, and unfortunately when they have kids now, their kids are not being treated in some cases with the privileges of citizenship. So I think we need to create a long-term path, and this would be an enormous incentive for people to want to pursue that path and then ultimately become citizens and start receiving a dividend.
When you first told your wife that you are running for president, she asked a very important question. What are you going to do about our health care?
Yeah, that was a question.
Which I think she echoed a lot of people's concerns, everyday concerns. It is an issue, one of the issues I think that really affects you day to day. Especially, I don't know, just personally, having been in and out of the hospital, I've had friends or family that have been in and out of the hospital. It's a day-to-day issue. So how do you hope to make changes that will directly impact people?
Well, I think our healthcare system is in many ways emblematic of what's going on in the rest of the country, where we have a very market-driven system, and we're spending twice as much on our healthcare as other developed countries, even to worse results by the numbers. I'm a numbers person, and so I just try and figure out what the actual costs are. And so to me, it's clear that we need to create a public option in the healthcare market that then enables us to negotiate for lower prices and higher levels of access. I have a lot of doctor friends. I was going to make an Asian joke there. But they tell me they spend a lot of their time on three things: paperwork, navigating insurance companies, and avoiding being sued. And that if you could get those three things to be a much lower part of their time, then they could have more time to spend with patients, and our care would improve. So a lot of this is around trying to ease up this incredible bureaucracy we've set up around healthcare with this maze of private insurance companies. When we get sick or injured, we're almost more stressed out about navigating the bureaucracy than we are dealing with the injury or sickness. Am I right?
Yes.
And there's no reason for that to be the case. My parents are back in Taiwan, and it blew their mind the first time they actually started using the healthcare system there. Anyone else have this experience? They were like, they couldn't believe it. They were like, it was like fast, seamless, inexpensive, and the rest of it. And then they come back to the U.S., and they used to think that the U.S. would be where they'd want to actually utilize the healthcare system, but now they're having a change of heart.
Who should dictate prices?
Well, the problem right now is the government's not even trying to negotiate lower prices in many, many instances. And so if you had a public option that you can negotiate prices on behalf of the American people, then it would be the government.
The government should, not the market.
Well, but I'm not someone that's trying to get rid of private insurance. And so in many ways, the goal is that you have a public option that can outcompete the marketplace. And so if the public option can demonstrably improve upon what's available in the marketplace, then what does that do? That actually introduces competitive pressures. So that, have you all noticed that your healthcare insurance costs always just go in one direction?
Yes.
Do you remember getting that bill and being like, oh, it went down 15%? That has never happened.
Yeah.
And so that's their revenue model. Their revenue model is we're just going to ratchet up the costs every year. So if there was a public option that actually helped keep costs in check, then you'd start seeing some more competitive pressures in the marketplace.
And you're not alone in this platform for Medicare for All or for your healthcare plan. How is yours different from, let's say, other candidates who are also vying for essentially the same thing, but how is your way to get there a little bit different?
So my plan is very similar to Pete Buttigieg's and some of the other candidates that are not quite in the single-payer Medicare for All, get rid of private insurance camp, which I believe is Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and maybe one other. So I think that you need a public option, but you need to try and outcompete private insurers. I think there are maybe half a dozen candidates who have similar plans.
Your president gang, Hurricane Dorian comes up the East Coast. How do you handle that national emergency?
Well, I keep my Sharpies in my desk.
Oh. Oh snap.
Right now, FEMA is part of the Department of Homeland Security, which to me is not the right way to go because literally they diverted funds from FEMA to ICE recently. And if anything, you have to have FEMA be standalone so it has its own resources and priorities, and then you need to make sure it has the resources it needs independently because we know with climate change that these hurricanes and storms and floods and disasters will be much more commonplace. So number one is you separate FEMA into its own agency, which it is. It's already its own agency, but it's part of Homeland Security, the umbrella. So you change that, and then the big thing that we have to do is try and make our communities more resilient before the Hurricane Dorian's strike. This country's become far too reactive, where essentially we have to wait until something breaks or goes dramatically wrong, and then everyone yells about it, and then you go in, and it's much more expensive. There have been some situations where we literally repaired the same home dozens of times, which I would suggest probably is not the most efficient way to go. So we need to try and get in front of these disasters, but certainly when Dorian strikes, we need to have the resources in place and an agency that's focused.
But President Yang, I want to understand here your ability to handle crisis management. What will you do on those days?
You mean would I personally decide to play weatherman and like fly?
I don't know if you want to do that, but you get my question, right?
Well, that is a question. You know, to me, if I thought that my presence were helpful and not disruptive, then I'd 100% go to where the storm is hitting. Though I think in many cases, frankly, that becomes a little bit more of a media narrative than genuinely helpful to the people on the ground.
On the question of climate change, and natural disaster, I think Jordan said once that with the climate change that's already in motion, there are certain things we can't stop. There's going to be a certain level of sea rise.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the realism. It's also a little bit depressing. But given that you've already talked about that we have to be proactive, take certain kinds of measures, that there's going to be a certain level of sea level rise, and we're dealing with an AAPI community that includes Pacific Islanders in places like Hawaii,